When my daughter-in-law closed the door that day, it wasn't loud. It didn't slam or echo through the house. But somehow, it was the quietest sound that hurt the most. I remember standing there, my hand still on the small suitcase I'd packed earlier that morning. Just a few clothes, some medicines, my old photo album, and a little jar of pickles I'd made myself. It was supposed to be a simple visit. 2 weeks, maybe 3, just enough time to see my son, play with my grandson, and help around the house. But life, as I've learned again and again, doesn't always go the way we hope. The sun was setting outside that evening, painting the curtains in shades of gold and orange. My daughter-in-law, Emma, stood by the doorway, her arms crossed, her face calm but distant. She didn't shout. She didn't argue. She just said quietly, "I think it's time you go back home now, Mom," and I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I didn't want my grandson, little Noah, to see the pain in my eyes. He was playing in the living room, his tiny cars scattered across the floor. He didn't know what was happening. He was just being a child, innocent, full of life. I nodded and said softly, "Of course, dear." I was thinking the same. Inside, my heart broke. I still remember when I first met Emma. My son, Daniel, had brought her home one spring afternoon. He was smiling in that way only a man in love can smile, wide, bright, with a little nervousness in his eyes. "Mom," he said, "this is Emma." She was polite, soft-spoken, and kind, or at least she seemed so at the time. She complimented my garden, helped me serve tea, and even asked for my recipes. I liked her immediately. I thought, my son has chosen well. When they married, I stood by their side, proud and grateful. Daniel had lost his father young, and raising him alone hadn't been easy. He'd always been my reason to keep going, to smile through the hard days. And when I saw him start his new life, I thought, finally my boy is happy. That's all that matters. The first few years were wonderful. I visited during holidays, birthdays, and sometimes just to bring food or help clean up. Emma was warm then. She'd hug me, thank me for my cooking, and tell Daniel, "Your mom spoils us." We'd laugh together at the dinner table, the 3 of us, with Noah later joining our family. I still remember the day he was born, the way Daniel's voice shook when he called me from the hospital. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "it's a boy. He looks just like Dad." I cried that night, holding his tiny photo close to my chest. That child became my joy. Every smile, every giggle, every "Grandma, look!" filled the emptiness that had quietly settled after my husband passed. But things started changing slowly, almost unnoticeably. Emma began to grow distant. At first, I thought it was just exhaustion. Raising a child, working, and managing a home, I understood. So I tried to help more. I'd come over unannounced with groceries, cook their favorite meals, and clean the kitchen. I didn't mean to intrude. I just wanted to make things easier. But one day I overheard her telling Daniel, "Your mother means well, but it feels like she's always here." Her tone wasn't angry, just tired. Still, those words stayed with me. I remember going home that night and sitting in my small kitchen, staring at the empty chair across from me. It used to be my husband's chair, and for a moment I whispered, "Maybe I've overstayed my welcome." Months passed and I tried to visit less often. But I missed them, Daniel and Noah especially. Every time I called, Noah would tell me about school, about his new friends, about the picture he drew of Grandma and her cookies. So when Daniel invited me for a short stay while Emma's mother went on a trip, I felt hopeful again. "Come stay with us for a while, Mom," he said. "Noah misses you." I didn't hesitate. I packed my bags the same day, excited like a child. The house smelled the same. A mix of cinnamon candles and laundry detergent. Noah ran into my arms, shouting, "Grandma's here!" Emma greeted me with a polite smile. It wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. Still, I told myself, maybe I'm just overthinking. The first few days were fine. I cooked breakfast, helped Noah with homework, folded laundry, and made sure dinner was ready when they came home. Daniel would smile, thank me, and say, "It feels good to have you here, Mom." But Emma's smile grew thinner each day. She started keeping her distance, staying in her room longer, spending more time on her phone. At dinner, she spoke less. Sometimes I'd catch her glancing at me. Not with anger, but with something harder to name, maybe discomfort. One night, after dinner, she said, "You really don't have to do all this." "Mom, I can manage?" I laughed softly. "Oh, I know, dear. I just enjoy helping." She nodded, but her eyes didn't match her smile. Something had changed, and I could feel it in the quiet moments between us. Those silences that used to feel peaceful now felt heavy. It all came to a head one evening. Daniel had gone out for work, and Noah was asleep. Emma and I sat in the living room folding laundry. The TV played softly in the background, some cooking show neither of us was really watching. Then, without looking at me, she said, "Mom, I think it's time you start thinking about going back home." I froze, a white towel still in my hands. I wanted to ask why. Had I done something wrong? But instead I just nodded slowly. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. She continued, her voice even. "I appreciate everything you've done, truly. But I think Daniel and I need a bit more space. You understand, right?" I forced a small smile. "Of course, dear. I was planning to leave soon anyway." It wasn't true. I hadn't planned it, but I wanted to leave with dignity. That's when she stood up, carried the folded towels away, and said, "Thank you for understanding." Later that night, I went to Noah's room and sat beside his bed. He was sleeping peacefully, his small hand resting on the blanket. I brushed his hair gently and whispered, "Grandma has to go soon, sweetheart, but I'll come see you again." He mumbled something in his sleep, something about pancakes, and I smiled through the tears. When morning came, I packed my small suitcase. Daniel wasn't home yet, and Emma was in the kitchen making coffee. I told her I'd call a cab. She nodded and said, "I'll tell Daniel you left safely." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just walked to the door, turned the handle, and stepped outside. The air was cool, the sky still pink from sunrise. And as I heard the door close behind me, I whispered quietly to myself, "God, if this is your plan, help me understand it." I didn't know it then, but that moment, that gentle, quiet exit, was not the end of my story. It was only the beginning of something I could never have expected. Because sometimes, when one door closes, God doesn't just open another. He leads you somewhere you never imagined going. When I returned home that morning, the silence greeted me before anything else. The clock on the wall ticked softly, echoing through the small house I'd lived in for over 30 years. Everything was just as I'd left it. My husband's old reading glasses still on the shelf, a faded photo of Daniel on his graduation day beside the lamp. I placed my suitcase near the couch and sat down slowly. For the first time in a long time, I didn't know what to do next. I'd always had a rhythm, caring for Daniel, then helping raise Noah. Now the days stretched out in front of me like a long, empty road. I thought about calling Daniel, but I didn't want to put him in an awkward position. I knew he loved me, I never doubted that. But love can get tangled in silence when other people's feelings stand between it. So instead, I made tea. That's what I've always done when life feels too heavy. Boil water, add the leaves, and wait. Waiting, I think, has always been part of my nature. The days turned into weeks. I'd wake up early, open the curtains, and watch the sun fill the room with a soft, forgiving light. I'd cook small meals, just enough for one person. And sometimes when I couldn't bear the quiet, I'd talk out loud to my husband's photo. "Do you see what's happening, love?" I'd whisper. "Our boy's grown, but I feel like I lost him again." The truth was, I wasn't angry at Emma. No, not really. I could see her side too, a young woman building her life, wanting her own space, her own way. Maybe I had been too present, too eager to help. It's something mothers do without realizing. We hold on, even when our children have already let go a little. Still, knowing that didn't make the loneliness any easier. One evening, Daniel called. His voice was warm, but there was a hint of hesitation in it. "Mom," he said, "I wanted to check if you reached home okay that day." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Yes, dear. I'm fine. Don't worry." There was a pause. I could hear Noah in the background, giggling about something on TV. "Mom," Daniel said softly, "Emma didn't mean to hurt you." She just, she feels overwhelmed sometimes. I understand, I said quickly, trying to sound steady. I just want both of you to be happy, he sighed. I know. We love you, Mom. You know that, right? I do, I replied, even though part of me wondered if love sometimes changes shape, still there, but hidden behind distance and politeness. When the call ended, I sat in silence again. I could still hear Noah's laughter echoing in my ears. I missed him more than I could say. A few weeks later, I got a small envelope in the mail. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately, Noah's messy, uneven letters. Inside was a drawing of 3 people, me, him, and Daniel, all holding hands. At the bottom, he'd written in red crayon, "Grandma, I miss your pancakes." My eyes filled with tears. That one small note brought back all the warmth I'd been missing. I placed the drawing on the refrigerator door, right next to my late husband's photo. For the first time in days, I smiled, a real, quiet smile that came from the heart. But time has a strange way of testing us. As the months went on, Daniel's calls grew shorter. Sometimes a quick, "How are you, Mom?" Sometimes just a text. I understood. Life gets busy, but it still hurt. I'd sit by the phone in the evenings hoping it would ring. Sometimes it did. Most times it didn't. To fill the empty hours, I started walking to the park every morning. There I'd see children playing, people laughing, life moving. It helped me breathe again. One morning, I met a woman sitting on the same bench I always used. She was in her 60s, wearing a light blue scarf and holding a paperback novel. We exchanged polite smiles, and after a few days of quiet nods, we began to talk. Her name was Margaret. She had kind eyes and a gentle way of speaking that reminded me of old friends. Over time, she told me about her own life, her daughter who lived overseas, her late husband, and how the silence at home sometimes felt heavier than her own thoughts. We became friends without realizing it. Every morning, we'd share tea from my thermos and talk about simple things, flowers, recipes, and sometimes the children who'd grown too busy for their mothers. One day, as we sat watching the sunrise, Margaret said, "You know, sometimes we hold on so tightly to our children that we forget God gave us lives of our own too." Her words stayed with me long after that morning. That evening, I sat by the window and whispered, "Maybe it's time I start living again, not waiting, not longing, but living." It felt strange saying that out loud, almost like I was betraying the role I'd always had, mother, grandmother, caretaker. But maybe there was something more for me to be. That night, I pulled out an old notebook. Inside were recipes I hadn't made in years. Jams, pickles, and sweets my neighbors used to ask for. I thought, why not start again, so I did. The next morning, I made a small batch of mango jam and gave a jar to Margaret. She loved it and insisted I sell some at the local community market. I laughed at first. Who would buy jam from an old woman like me? But the next Saturday I went, and to my surprise, the jars sold out within an hour. People smiled, complimented the taste, and one woman said, "It tastes like my grandmother's." That one line, "like my grandmother's," warmed something deep inside me. I started going every week. It wasn't about the money. It was about feeling useful again, connected again. For the first time in years, I had something that was mine. A few months later, something unexpected happened. I was at the market setting up my small table when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Mom?" I turned around, and there was Daniel, standing with Noah, who was holding a small paper bag. For a moment, I couldn't speak. It felt like time had folded back on itself, bringing me the joy I'd been quietly praying for. "Grandma!" Noah shouted, running into my arms. He hugged me so tightly I almost dropped the jam jar I was holding. Daniel smiled. "Emma saw the flyers about your jams. She told me you might be here." My heart softened, even after everything she had told him. Maybe in her own way, she cared too. Noah looked up at me with his bright eyes. "Grandma, can I help you sell your jams?" I laughed through the tears. "Of course, sweetheart. You'll be my best helper." That day, the 3 of us sold jars together. Daniel helped carry boxes, Noah handed out samples, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Belonging. When the market closed, Daniel turned to me and said quietly, "Mom, I'm sorry." "For everything?" I shook my head gently. "No, dear, don't be. We all grow, and sometimes growing means stepping apart for a while." He looked down, his voice soft. "Emma's been thinking, too. She wants to invite you for dinner next week. Just dinner, no long stays, no tension. She said she misses your cooking." My heart swelled, not with pride, but with gratitude. Because forgiveness, I realized, doesn't always come with apologies. Sometimes it just shows up quietly in small acts of kindness. That night, when I returned home, I sat by the window again. The stars were bright, and the house didn't feel so empty anymore. I whispered a small prayer. "Thank you, God. Maybe you were never closing doors. You were just teaching me how to walk through new ones." The night of the dinner, I stood in front of my small wardrobe for almost an hour. It's funny. I'd attended weddings, funerals, and birthdays without a second thought, but that evening felt different. My hands trembled as I buttoned my simple beige blouse. I wanted to look nice, but not too formal. Present, but not imposing. After all, this wasn't just dinner. It was a bridge being rebuilt, one careful plank at a time. Before leaving, I glanced at the refrigerator, at Noah's drawing still pinned beside my husband's photo. I smiled softly and whispered, "Wish me luck, love." Then I took a deep breath, grabbed a small jar of jam from my new batch, mango and honey, Noah's favorite, and stepped out the door. The drive to Daniel's house felt longer than usual, though I'd made that trip hundreds of times before. Every streetlight seemed to hum with quiet anticipation. When I finally reached their home, I stood on the porch for a moment before knocking. I could hear laughter inside, Noah's voice, high and full of joy. That sound alone gave me the courage to press the doorbell. The door opened, and there was Emma. For a second, neither of us spoke. She looked the same, graceful, composed, her hair neatly tied back. But there was something softer in her eyes this time. "Hi," she said gently. "I'm really glad you came," I smiled. "Thank you for inviting me." She stepped aside. "Please, come in." The house smelled of rosemary and roasted chicken, my son's favorite meal since childhood. On the table, I noticed a salad with cherry tomatoes arranged neatly in a circle, the same way I used to serve it when Daniel was little. Emma caught my gaze and said quietly, "Daniel told me it was your recipe. I thought it might make you feel more at home." Her voice carried no pride, no defense, just sincerity. And in that moment, the weight I'd been carrying began to lift, even if only slightly. Noah came running into the room, his eyes lighting up when he saw me. "Grandma!" He hugged my waist tightly. "I told Mom you'd come. Look!" "I made you a place card." He pointed proudly at the dining table, a small folded paper with my name written in bright blue crayon, surrounded by little hearts. Right next to his own seat, I laughed softly and kissed his forehead. "Oh, my little artist." Daniel came out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. When he saw me, his face relaxed into a warm, genuine smile. "Mom, you made it." He kissed my cheek and whispered, "I'm really happy you're here." And for the first time in a long while, I believed him. Dinner began with small talk, the kind where everyone tries too hard to sound casual. Daniel spoke about work, Noah shared stories from school, and I mostly listened. But beneath the surface, I could feel something shifting, a tenderness that had been waiting to reappear. At one point, Noah said between bites, "Grandma, Mom helped me make pancakes this morning." "But they didn't taste like yours," Emma laughed softly. "That's true. I think Grandma has a secret ingredient she's not sharing." I smiled. "Maybe I'll teach you both next time." Emma met my eyes, and for the first time, she didn't look away. Instead, she nodded. "I'd like that." It was a small moment, but it carried years' worth of healing. After dinner, while Daniel and Noah were clearing the table, I stood beside Emma at the sink. She handed me a dish towel. "You don't have to help," she said. "I want to," I replied. And we washed in silence for a few minutes, the sound of running water filling the gaps that words couldn't yet bridge. Finally, she spoke, quietly, hesitantly. "I owe you an apology." I looked at her surprised. She didn't meet my eyes, just kept rinsing the dishes. "I know I wasn't kind before," she continued. "I was defensive. I thought you were judging me, the way I parent, the way I run my home. But now I realize you were just trying to help." Her voice broke slightly. I was scared. I didn't want to lose control of my own family. I placed the towel down gently. "Emma," I said, "you don't need to apologize. I understand. I was once a young wife, too. I remember what it feels like, wanting to do everything your way." She finally looked up, eyes glistening. "I should have seen how much you loved Daniel and Noah. I pushed you away when you only wanted to be close." I reached out and touched her hand lightly. Sometimes love looks different depending on where we stand. You wanted space, I wanted closeness. We both were right, and a little wrong, too. For a moment, the kitchen felt like a sacred place, not because of the light or the smells of food, but because forgiveness had quietly walked in and taken a seat between us. Later, when the dishes were done, Daniel brought out dessert, apple pie with vanilla ice cream. Noah giggled as he tried to balance a scoop on his plate. I handed Emma the small jar I'd brought. "Mango and honey," I said. Noah's favorite. Her face softened. "Thank you." She unscrewed the lid, inhaled deeply, and smiled. "It smells wonderful." "It's made with a little sugar," I said with a playful wink. "And a lot of patience." We both laughed, softly, like women who'd finally found a language they could share. When it was time to leave, Noah clung to me. "Grandma, can you come again next week?" I knelt down, brushing his hair gently. "I'd love to, sweetheart. Maybe we can bake together next time." Daniel walked me to the door. He looked tired, but peaceful. "Mom," he said, "I think tonight was a new start." I smiled. "Yes, dear. I think it was." Before I left, Emma appeared beside him. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "And for not giving up on us." I met her gaze and replied, "Family is never about giving up. It's about finding new ways to hold on." Driving home, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Light. The night sky stretched endlessly above me, the stars faint but clear. I turned off the radio and let the quiet fill the car. When I reached home, I placed my keys on the counter and looked around. The house didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt peaceful, like it was finally waiting for something good. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the soft glow of streetlights flicker across the glass. In the stillness, I whispered, "Thank you, God, for giving me back my family, and not as they were, but as they're meant to be." Then, almost without thinking, I added, "And thank you for teaching me that sometimes love doesn't shout to be heard. Sometimes it just waits quietly, like a light left on guiding us home." A few months passed after that dinner, and things between us began to change quietly, like the way winter slowly melts into spring. Emma would call sometimes, asking for a recipe or just to talk about Noah's school projects. Daniel dropped by more often, usually on his way home from work. Even Noah insisted on spending some weekends at my place. It wasn't grand or dramatic, just small gestures, simple moments that stitched our family back together thread by thread. I found peace in those days. My mornings were filled with the smell of brewed tea, and my evenings with Noah's laughter echoing through the little house. But even as joy returned, I began to notice something else, a quiet fatigue in my bones that I couldn't quite explain. At first, I thought it was just age. A little ache here, a bit of dizziness there. I brushed it off, the way mothers often do. There's always something more important than our own health, isn't there? But one morning, as I was slicing fruit for breakfast, my hands trembled so much that the knife slipped and fell. I stared at it on the floor, my breath unsteady. That was the moment I knew. Something wasn't right. The doctor's office smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender, a strange mix of calm and fear. After a few tests, the doctor sat across from me, hands folded gently. "Mrs. Harris," he said, "you have a mild heart condition. Nothing too severe right now, but you'll need rest and regular treatment." He spoke kindly, but the words landed like heavy stones. Rest, treatment. slower pace. I nodded quietly, though my mind was already racing. Who would water the garden? What about Noah's visits? Would I still be able to cook for them, bake, clean, do all the little things that made me me? As I left the clinic, I whispered to myself, I'm fine. I just need a little more time. I didn't tell Daniel or Emma right away. I didn't want to worry them, not after everything we'd been through. Instead, I tried to keep things normal. But normal has a way of slipping away when your body starts to betray you. Some mornings, I couldn't get out of bed without holding on to the wall. Other days, I'd lose my breath just walking to the mailbox. Still, I forced a smile whenever Noah came over. "Grandma, you okay?" he asked one day, noticing how I sat down more often. "Of course, sweetheart," I said with a grin. "Grandma's just saving her energy for our pancakes." He laughed and went back to playing. But deep inside, I knew I was lying, to him and to myself. One Sunday afternoon, Emma and Daniel came to visit unexpectedly. I was sitting by the window, knitting slowly, when I heard the knock. "Mom," Daniel said as he walked in. "We were in the area and thought we'd stop by," I smiled. What a lovely surprise. But as I stood up to greet them, the room suddenly spun. The next thing I remember was Emma shouting my name and Daniel catching me before I hit the floor. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the couch. Emma was holding my hand, her face pale and frightened. Daniel was on the phone with a doctor, pacing nervously. "Mom, why didn't you tell us?" he said once he hung up. His voice cracked. "You've been sick, haven't you?" I wanted to speak, but my throat tightened. Emma brushed a strand of hair from my forehead. "You scared us," she whispered, her eyes glistening. I managed a small smile. "I didn't want to worry you." Daniel sat beside me, his hand trembling. "You're our mother," he said. "You don't have to carry everything alone." For the first time, I saw not just my son, but the man he had become. And in that moment, I realized something simple but profound. Sometimes, letting others care for you is also an act of love. For the next few weeks, I stayed at their home so they could look after me. At first, I resisted. "I'm fine," I insisted. "I don't want to be a burden." But Emma wouldn't hear it. "Mom," she said softly. "Mom, not Mrs. Harris, not her. You're not a burden. You're family." Those words stayed with me. She prepared my meals with such care, soups, soft rice, gentle flavors that reminded me of comfort and home. Every night before bed, she'd bring my medicine and sit beside me for a few minutes, talking about her day. Sometimes, I'd catch her glancing at me with a strange look, part concern, part guilt. One night, I asked quietly, "Emma, are you all right?" She hesitated. Then she said, "I keep thinking about how I made you feel before, when I told you to leave that day. I can't forgive myself." I reached for her hand. "Then let me forgive you," I whispered. "Because I already have." Tears welled in her eyes and she nodded silently. In that soft moment, I realized that what broke us before wasn't hate. It was misunderstanding. And what healed us now was grace. Noah was my little nurse through it all. He'd bring me water, draw pictures for me, and sit quietly reading beside my bed. One morning, he came in holding a folded piece of paper. "Grandma," he said, "I made something for you." It was a crayon drawing. Me sitting in a chair with a golden heart floating above my head. Underneath, he'd written in shaky letters, "God opened another door." I looked at him, tears filling my eyes. "Who taught you that?" he smiled. "Mom said that's what you told her once." I couldn't speak. My heart was too full. So I just held him close, feeling the warmth of his little arms around me, and thought to myself, even if my heart is weak, it's full. Days turned into weeks, and slowly my strength began to return. One morning, I walked out into the garden with Emma by my side. The roses had bloomed again, bright and fragrant, swaying gently in the breeze. "Do you know what I realized, Emma?" I said quietly. She shook her head. "I used to think the closed door, the one you shut that day, was the end. But now I see it was just a beginning. If you hadn't told me to leave, maybe we wouldn't have learned how to come back stronger." She looked at me with tears in her eyes. You're right. Maybe God needed us to break so he could rebuild us better. I nodded, smiling faintly. Sometimes love needs silence to grow. Sometimes it needs pain to understand itself. We stood there for a long time, the sunlight warming our faces, the air thick with peace. A few weeks later, Daniel surprised me with a small garden bench. He placed it under the old oak tree in my yard, the one my husband planted decades ago. "I thought you could rest here when you get tired," he said. I ran my fingers across the wood, tracing the carvings: family, faith, forever. Tears welled up in my eyes. I looked at my son, the man who once stood silent between me and his wife, now standing strong, bridging us both. And I whispered, "Your father would be proud." That evening, as the sky turned pink and the air cooled, we all sat together on that bench: Daniel, Emma, Noah, and me. No one spoke much. We didn't need to. The silence between us was no longer heavy. It was sacred. Noah leaned against me, his small hand in mine. "Grandma," he said softly, "are you happy now?" I smiled, looking at the horizon. "Yes, sweetheart. I think I finally am." And in that moment, I felt something beautiful. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of peace. A peace that comes only when you've loved, lost, forgiven, and loved again. Later that night, after everyone left, I sat alone by the window, the moonlight spilling gently across the floor. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you, God, for closing one door and opening another, one that led not to comfort, but to understanding." Then I smiled to myself, knowing that this love that had survived distance, pride, and silence was the kind that never truly ends. It just changes shape. It just grows quieter, but it's always there, waiting, like a light in the dark, reminding us how to find our way home. The months that followed were quiet and tender. My health remained fragile, but my heart felt stronger than ever. Every morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains, painting the room in a soft golden glow. It was the kind of light that made everything, even pain, look gentle. I spent most mornings sitting by the window, wrapped in a shawl Emma had knitted for me. I'd sip tea slowly, watching the world outside. Children running to school, neighbors tending to gardens, the simple rhythm of life continuing. And every now and then I'd smile at the thought of how far we'd come as a family. There was no bitterness left, only gratitude for the love that broke, healed, and grew again. One afternoon, while sorting through an old box of letters and photographs, I found an envelope with Daniel's handwriting on it. It was dated years ago, before he got married. The paper had yellowed slightly, and I realized I had never opened it. My hands trembled a little as I unfolded it. Inside was a simple note. "Mom, if you ever feel like I've forgotten you, please know I haven't. I'm just trying to figure out how to be a good husband, a good man, like Dad taught me. I hope I never make you feel unloved. I love you always, your son Daniel." My throat tightened as I read the words. All those years when I felt invisible, when I thought I had lost my son's heart, he had been thinking of me too. He just didn't know how to say it. I pressed the letter against my chest, whispering, "Oh, Daniel, you always were a good man." The wind outside rustled the curtains softly, as if the world was listening. That evening, Emma came over with Noah. They brought dinner, warm soup and bread, and laughter that filled every corner of the house. After dinner, while Daniel and Noah played in the living room, Emma helped me tidy up. When she saw the letter on the table, she asked quietly, "What's that?" "It's something your husband wrote a long time ago," I said with a small smile. "I just found it." She looked at me for a moment, then said softly, "He gets that from you, you know." "Gets what?" I asked. "That quiet way of loving people," she said. "You both say so little but feel so deeply." Her words touched me. I had never thought of it that way before. But maybe that was true. Maybe love didn't always have to be loud. Maybe it could simply be steady, a light that never flickers, even in silence. Later, after they left, I sat down at my desk and took out a pen. For weeks I had wanted to write something, not for anyone else but for them. Something they could find one day, when I was no longer around to speak. I began to write. To my family, if you are reading this, it means time has moved on, as it always does. I want you to know that my days were full, not of wealth or grand adventures, but of love, forgiveness, and grace. Life gave me pain, yes, but it also gave me second chances. When you told me to leave that day, I thought my world had ended. But God, in His quiet mercy, opened another door, one that led me back to you. Don't be afraid of closed doors. They are not endings. They are invitations to see life differently, to grow, to heal. Daniel, my son, you made me proud every single day. And Emma, you taught me that love can be reborn even after misunderstanding. To little Noah, my sunshine, never forget that kindness can heal what anger destroys. When you look at the garden, remember that every flower blooms after the rain. So will you. With love, always, Mom. I placed the letter in the drawer beside my bed, next to a family photo, the four of us, sitting together on that garden bench. It wasn't a goodbye letter. It was a thank you. As the days went by, I noticed how time seemed to slow down. My body was weaker, but my spirit felt light, free almost. There was peace in knowing that everything was finally as it should be. One night, rain began to fall, soft, steady, cleansing. I sat by the window again, listening to the rhythm of the drops on the glass. The scent of wet earth filled the air, and I thought of my husband, of how he used to say rain was God's way of washing away the pain of yesterday. I smiled, whispering, "You were right, dear." It always was, and as thunder rolled softly in the distance, I closed my eyes, feeling safe, as if the world itself was wrapping me in its arms. The next morning, Daniel came to visit early. He found me still sitting by the window, peaceful and still, my hands resting on that same letter. The look on his face said everything, grief, love, and acceptance, all at once. They laid me to rest under the old oak tree, the one where we once sat together, where the bench still stood strong. The air was filled with the scent of roses, the same ones I had tended for years. Emma placed her hand on Daniel's shoulder and whispered, "She's home now." Noah placed a small folded paper beside me, another drawing. This one showed a door open wide, light streaming through it. He had written underneath, "God opened another." Months later, Daniel and Emma came back to visit the garden often. They would sit on that bench, holding hands, letting Noah play among the flowers. Every time the wind rustled through the leaves, Emma would smile faintly and say, "I think she's here." And Daniel would nod, his eyes misty, but calm. "Yes," he'd say softly. She never really left. As the seasons changed, the garden grew even more beautiful, brighter, fuller, alive. Emma started planting new flowers each spring, and Daniel added a small plaque beneath the tree. It read simply, "For Mom, who taught us that every closed door leads to another open one." And every time they sat there, they felt it, a gentle peace that seemed to whisper through the wind. Forgive, love, begin again, final reflection, voice over tone. In the end, my story wasn't about loss, it was about grace. It was about learning that love isn't measured by how much we get, but how much we give, even when it hurts. Sometimes God lets doors close, not to punish us, but to redirect us. To teach us that strength isn't in holding on, but in letting go with faith. If you've ever been shut out, misunderstood, or left behind, I hope my story reminds you of this truth. You are never really alone. Because when one door closes, if you wait patiently with an open heart, another one will always open. And maybe, just maybe, it will lead you exactly where you were meant to be all along,